20 years ago, a reality TV series about a struggling promotion aired on Spike TV that, for better or worse, would go on to change the landscape of sports and pop culture. This is a retrospective of that series, its key players, and its lasting legacy. This is TUFtwenty.
TUFtwenty is brought to you by The Contrarians, a movie podcast where we are right and you're wrong. Be sure to subscribe to The Contrarians on your favorite podcatcher for access to this entire series, as well as Julio and Alex's most recent film follies. Our main website, wearethecontrarians.com, houses all of our past episodes as well.
You can find The Contrarians across social media under the handle @ContrarianPrime.
It's not just us, though. As for this 14-part journey of nostalgia and shame, we've got a championship corner.
I'm Joe Holbert, and for years I've discussed fake fighting on the internet. Now, however, I'm trying my hand at the real thing. Usually, you can find me at the Late Night Grim, but for this particular adventure, I'll be sitting under the Team Couture learning tree, providing insight to my fellow men of honor.
It's niche micro-celebrity Steve. You may know me from Twitter, the Songs with Friends podcast, or various scuffles in the world of professional wrestling. By the end of this journey, you are no doubt going to feel this, because this is the ultimate.
Now that the cage door is locked, let's get down to business.
Time to talk asparagus.
All right, we are already at the semifinals here, boys. We're kicking off the middleweight semifinals with this installment of The Ultimate Fighter. It is episode 10. Being that we have moved to the semis, it's time for a moment of silence. That means the episode titles have ceased. As from here till the end of the series, it'll just be titled based on which semifinal bout is going on. So
I thought the moment of silence was because there's no more Willa appearances, unless I'm surprised and they bring her back for something else other than challenges.
I think at this point they knew that they were lucky to get this far without anyone having to drop out of the show. So they're like, all right, the team challenges are done. Willa.
That's why Willa was dressed in street clothes. She was going to the airport directly after recording her last bit.
So leave the memories alone for the episode titles, the episode names. I think Ground and Pound and Sprawl and Brawl are probably at the top of the list there. Joe, do you remember when TNA would name their episodes?
I do. It's hard not to remember it because they would very aggressively show it off to you with the title screens and such. It's very, very innovative, they called that at the time.
Well, Lucha Underground did that as well. I remember Every Woman is Sexy, Every Woman is a Star being my favorite.
No way that promotion wasn't a money laundering scam, right?
Correct.
All right. Airing on March 21st of 2005. We are very much on the road to WrestleMania here. And leading into this episode of The Ultimate Fighter, the World Wrestling Federation presented their flagship television show, Monday Night Raw, from the Jefferson Civic Center in Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham, or is it Birmingham, Joe? No, you have one too, don't you?
Yeah, I'm not sure they're the same, but yeah. We would go Birmingham.
Okay.
We wouldn't. The ham is a little aggressive for me personally, but
we kicked off with Shawn Michaels defeating future NWA World Heavyweight Champion Rob Conway in 8:38. The con man got fucking almost 10 minutes of TV time with Shawn Michaels.
That's the backing of the French government at work there, boys.
Oh, yeah, we explained to you, Julio, the French tag team. This gentleman, Rob Conway, joined them after posing as a member of the U.S. military and then becoming a French sympathizer and siding with the French. If you thought I was making this up as I went along, I would believe you, but that's really what happened. And my boys can back me up.
It's quickly become apparent that we're going to have to reunite in 10 years for a 2005 Raw season.
Here we go. Christy Hemme Tajiri and William Regal with Lita defeated Maven, Molly Holly, and Simon Dean with Trish Stratus at 4:28. That sounds like a Fire Pro Wrestling match right there. Christian and Edge, again, teaming in 05 is weird. With Tyson Tomko defeated Chris Jericho and Shelton Benjamin in 8:20. Chris Benoit defeated Tyson Tomko in 2:26. And then again, another Pick Your Poison match. Batista defeated Kane in a Pick Your Poison ladder match at 8:42. So Snitsky, Kane, Batista, is getting ready for the ultimate giant Triple H here at WrestleMania.
In a ladder match?
They had big general manager mode on SmackDown vs. Raw Energy.
Oh, if I said ladder, I misspoke. It was a lumberjack match.
Okay.
Oh, that makes more sense.
That makes a lot more sense.
They use axes in those matches.
I wish.
There was a wrestler who, the lumberjack match is the idea, Julio, is just a bunch of dudes surround the ring. So if you try to leave, you can't, and they throw you back in. There was this wrestler named Damian Sandow who wasn't that good and got really overhyped, but he one time in a lumberjack match came out dressed as a lumberjack, and I thought it was fucking hilarious. So that's always my thumbs up for him, the seal of approval.
There was a Raw in 1993 that had a lumberjack match with Duggan and Michaels where they all wore the flannel, and Yokozuna was one of the lumberjacks. So they just like cut a fucking head hole in a flannel blanket for him and just threw it on him like a poncho.
There have been very rarely, but I witnessed one in person, Julio, this match concept, the lumberjack match. They have the fans do it, and they give the fans leather straps to hit the bad guy if the bad guy gets out of the ring. They did one in TNA.
Like a really bad idea.
With hilariously, that was the pay-per-view main event, right, Joe, with Samoa Joe and Jarrett. Now those fans were, those fans were all plants, I'm pretty sure. But old XCW, which was the local promotion that ran in Denton, Texas every Friday night, that saw such greats as the Necro Butcher, Masada, Hot Stuff Hernandez, entertained the drunk college fans every week. Bryan Danielson came through there once. They had one of these, and they gave drunk college kids leather straps to hit the bad guy, and it did not go well, if you can believe that. Mainly because the bad guy had a valet who one of the fans slapped her in the ass with the leather strap, and it was all downhill from there.
That got worse with every single word. That was incredible.
All right. Julio, lift our spirits. The box office. What was going on post-spring break?
Post-spring break, Alex, a surprise, I'm not going to say bomb, but I'm surprised that this didn't crack the top 5, not even the top 10. Miss Congeniality 2, Armed and Fabulous, came in at number 11, which, I don't know, I mean, a sequel to the extremely popular Sandra Bullock vehicle, Miss Congeniality. Is it just because they didn't bring Benjamin Bratt back? I don't know, but that didn't crack the top 10. The other 2 new releases did. So Hitch stayed at number 5. Will Smith bringing 9 more million. New release number 1. The Ice Princess, 9.6 million, barely edging out Hitch. It's number 4. What's the Ice Princess, Alex?
I was looking it up
Michelle
right now.
Trachtenberg vehicle?
Michelle Trachtenberg, Hayden Panettiere, Joan Cusack. Kim Cattrall's in it, so you know it's a certified banger. It's on Disney Plus, Hulu, if you want to watch it after
Legit.
this.
I mean, it was the top 5 for that weekend, so maybe it's worth checking out. They could not overpower The Pacifier. Vin Diesel drops to number 3 with 18 million. The previous number 1, Robots, drops down to number 2 with 29 million. And number 1, debuting that week, The Ring 2. I haven't seen either of the Ring movies. This came out at 44 million.
The first one was like a phenomenon. Like people were, that was a big moment in time thing. Is it Naomi Watts is in that? Is that accurate?
At least on the first one.
Okay. I haven't seen the second one. Steve, were you did you take any dates to see The Ring when that came out?
I watched it in a young lady's living room approximately 2 a.m. one night.
There you go. Were you doing the Chuck Liddell stance while you were watching it? You were like, no, don't do it.
I should say I saw approximately 40 minutes of The Ring in some young lady's living room in 2000, whatever.
How great is it that throughout the show now there's 2 different things you think of when you hear the Chuck Liddell stance? There's now the wide-legged, orthodox, ready to throw, and then there's the other sort of bizarre manipulation of arms, jaw, and everything in between.
Well, Steve, last we checked in, it's 50 Cent's world, and we're just living in it. How was the stronghold on the music scene going?
Brother, when you pitched this idea of doing a music top 5 every week, my immediate response was that we would be spending a lot of time with Mariah Carey. I thought the emancipation of Mimi was taking hold, but apparently it's not quite her time yet. It is still 50s era. Exact same 5 songs. Number 5, Disco Inferno, 550. Number 4, The Game featuring 50 with How We Do. Number 3, Mario Holding Steady with Let Me Love You. Number 2, Green Day's Boulevard of Broken Dreams. And number 1, 50 Cent and Olivia at the Candy Shop, where it will apparently be for the rest of our natural lives.
So 10 episodes later, we've definitely seen how different it is when it comes to movie rankings and music rankings. is this because there's not new music being released every week? I don't keep track, so I wouldn't know.
At this time, the music industry was still going pretty strong. I mean, TRL was still on, but 50 Cent had that album was just a juggernaut. And with these staggered releases of singles that never really fell off the charts, he really clogged that lane in a way that very few before him were able to do, at least contemporarily speaking.
Isn't it so weird to think about a time when MTV music television was still playing music videos? Well, that's radio play, It was a different time.
Yes.
All right, so we kick off episode 10 of the first season of The Ultimate Fighter with a fight recap. We see the barn burner that we discussed in the last episode between Alex Schonauer and Forrest Griffin. And here we get an explanation about scar tissue. They explain, where cuts happen and how they can happen and open back up. Joe, top of your head, worst scar tissue in MMA history. Who is it?
The first thing that comes to mind is a little bit complicated, but you'll get where I'm going with it. Nick Diaz having like a surgical procedure to shave away the scar tissue was a big thing back in, because the KJ Noons fight, he lost to Kaz, right? And then he went away for an actual, and this became like a lead Joe Rogan talking point for years when he talked about fights and stuff. And he went away and had all of the scar tissue removed, and it was like and Vonderlei had he had the nose and the eyes, and he looked like a mask.
He came out with a new face, man.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, I always think of Nick Diaz personally.
Yeah, that's...
Would the best scar tissue be Red Hot Chili Peppers?
Well played, sir. Well played. Julio, just to kind of offer the insight, yeah, they explain it here, but if you get cut like in the same spot, like, your eyes and shit, there was, as Joe mentioned, a fighter named Vanderlei Silva who, before he got into Pride Fighting Championship and eventually the UFC, was a bare knuckle fighter, and so his face was just gnarly to the point where he had to have like a shoot facelift to like get everything shaved down and back in place, and when he came out of it, he looked like a different person. It was very, very strange.
It's an even bigger issue among boxers, right? Like world level boxers, like I'd say 50% of them have pronounced scar tissue. Like Ricky Hatton, Alex, you and I will be very familiar. That was like a plot line for every single fight he had, right? The scar tissue. What if he gets cut?
Miguel Cotto, one of my favorite boxers ever, also had very, very pronounced scar tissue and headbutts and shit, opening up on the eye. We just saw that in the Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano fight the other night. Steve, we're taking a bit of a detour here, but I want to go here. Worst pro wrestling forehead from Gig Marks.
Aesthetically, I'd say Abdullah. But for day-to-day functionality for what they do in their real life, it's got to be Ric Flair. Because Rick will bleed if he sneezes. He is able to just bust himself open on command with his open palm. Like, it's horrifying. I did a bit here at the house when I was drunk a few weeks ago, doing the Ric Flair slap yourself with the forehead bit.
You see that? That promo where Triple H and him had the sledgehammer, he like is pounding his cut to open it back up. It still hurts. They just took the stitches out an hour ago.
Kelly was so concerned for what I was doing.
I will say, when you're talking about great, I mean, Bruiser Brody's action figure featuring Gig Marks felt like a legacy moment, to be honest. That felt like something for the history books, Of
course, there's 100, lower level guys. Masato Tanaka comes to mind.
New Jack had a gnarly forehead. Steve
Corino, at a very early age, his forehead looked horrific.
Devon Dudley, another underrated one. Yeah, there's some contenders.
Of course, Carlos Colon. Pretty much, if you spend any time in Puerto Rico, your face is fucked. It is what it is.
Dwayne was smart. Dwayne always cut at the hairline, or even Steve Austin, for having one of the more famous blade jobs in history, isn't that obvious. Triple H used to, like, his forehead was always tender for many years, but now, he just, his whole body's beaten. That's what a massive heart attack will do to you, but,
They say, like, the big issue, this is a real detour now, but generally the guys who have the real problem are the guys who go down, right? And then they start like a scratch card. It's a deeply unfortunate situation. Wrestling's very normal, Julio. Don't worry about it.
Julio's seen The Wrestler. He knows how this works.
Of course,
I've become very familiar with the concept of blading.
Yeah.
And we make fun of Mickey Rourke's blading job.
That's right.
Continuously.
I did a Battle Royal, Julio, last April, which is just the most bullshit wrestling match you can do. That's why I agreed to do it. There's very little actual effort, but one of the guys pulled out like a scalpel kit. It was prepping blades before we went out there. I'm like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? This is a charity show. Nobody's even paying attention. There's a guy with a stuffed hippo in the corner. He's got the right idea. All right, let's go out there, forearms, brother to brother, walk and talk, and then let's take this home. If I get blood on me for this, everyone's going to die.
One of my favorite things is when going back and watching like from the 70s and 80s, anything with Lou Albano, how he always had fresh cuts all over his face. Because Lou Albano was a manager, Julio, and he was also a notorious drunk. And like the story was he would just take a blade and just like do this shit in the match. Like just run it haphazardly anywhere that it needed to go. He was in the Girls Just Want to Have Fun music video. So there you go. He played Cyndi Lauper's dad. Trying to bring this back around. He had something to do with Goonies, I think. Wasn't the Goonies song? There were wrestlers in the music video, right?
I didn't know there was a song for the Goonies.
Cyndi Lauper did a song for the Goonies, and I believe that like Nikolai Volkov and Roddy Piper were in the music video.
Goonies Never Say Die is the song.
All right, so we're back on track here. We are a film podcast after all, so we're back to the Goonies. we're back to scar tissue and blading. Forrest is back at the house, and he's just eating now, and he just to the point. I think he needed a subtitle because he just says it so genuinely. He turns to Koscheck and he goes, "He kicked my ass," or Lieben. It's someone he turns to. I think it might be Lieben after all, but and Lieben talks about. Yeah, we were all just like on the sidelines, like, what the fuck is happening? And then Forrest takes his sweater off and he's got his elbow bandaged up because he hyperextended it, throwing an overhand right.
He also, when he gets stitched up and they put the mascara on and he goes, I'm going goth with it.
Well, while the doctor's stitching him up, he's talking to him like he's talking to a well-behaved puppy. He's like, you're a tough little man. You're an ultimate fighter. And then before Forrest walks in, their green team is sitting around having a casual conversation where they reveal they're pretty knowledgeable about the fragility of scar tissue.
Complete checked out, just dudes with their shirts off in jeans sitting around the house, just talking about whatever they can to pass the time to entertain themselves. That is short-lived, though, because we get called back to the gym because Dana's got to make an announcement, boys. Julio, did you see this coming? It's going to be teammate versus teammate in the semifinals.
I did not, and I relished it. I was like, this is an awesome twist. And then my reaction was the complete opposite of what happened on screen, where everybody started whining. And I was like, what did you guys not expect to at some point have to fight somebody that you like? It's especially with the constant trading, like Chuck keeps sending people over to Randy's team. So you were going to have to fight your buddy. I mean, some people already have in a way. So I did the coaches like I think there's at least one talking head of Couture just going like, I can't believe that this is happening. My boys have been training as a unit and they've been losing.
But to your point, the teams have changed. This is very strange the way this is presented, because I agree with you that just generally the idea of fighting each other shouldn't have been a surprise to the fellas, but they haven't even been the same team. Like Randy just got Kenny like a week ago. Like what is the big deal, man?
Yeah, we get like Lieben, kind of doing that thing where he's punching his palm and exhaling really dramatically, and then there's an awesome cut to Chuck Liddell, who just dips his head and shakes it so disapprovingly. And then, as Julio mentioned, Joe, Coach Couture, is just he can't believe this. They've massacred his boys right in front of him.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine how upset Randy would have been if he actually trained any winners to this point. He'd been distraught. But he's so just downtrodden, right? Like this is a moral maneuver from Dana White. Terrible.
The main thing that I pieced together this time around watching this is like, oh, this is their way they could guarantee a green versus blue final. Yeah. Because if things had gone on the way they had, it was probably going to be a sea of blue. It was going to be the opposite of the recent election. It was going to be a sea of blue taking over.
So do you think that this is what they had planned, or at least like what Dana White had planned from the beginning and he just didn't tell anybody? Or
I don't. I actually think a lot of this came together late, and even to the point where Dana's announcement, there's a ton of audio added in post. Yeah. Right? Like his audio is all. I think maybe it's the free round. I'm not sure. I think a lot of this is them just like, maybe we'll do that next. And I think to Alex's point, I think they even pretty much say as much about wanting it to be, that both teams represented in the final. So this season, one of the things that's, I remembered a lot of the hijinks and the fights. I'd forgotten how loose the format was and how much like they didn't really think through the way this would work as a real tournament, quote unquote. So yeah, I think a lot of it's coming together very late.
Now, how do you feel about the fact that apparently Dana White is the one that's choosing the pairings? Like, there's no discussion. He's just like, this person's going to fight this person.
Better get used to it, brother.
Well, are these fair pairings? I guess that's the question. Did he choose them for dramatic purposes? As in, like, it's going to be very interesting to see Kenny fight Lieben after they've been bros for a couple days? Or did he choose them because they really are like the best pairings as far as matches, like prowess?
To be honest, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but Diego and Koscheck is a really good matchup, and stylistically, so
yeah.
But see, I'm excited about that, not because I have anything like I can't really tell about their fighting styles, how they're gonna meld, but just about like, well, they've been very prominent figures on the show, and they've been on the same side the entire time, so they've never been antagonistic against each other. So I want to see that fight.
Joe, what would you say? Is Dana historically as a matchmaker? He'll say he makes the fights people want to see, but where do you go on that? He obviously also protects people he likes, and I don't think he was doing this like out of the idea of these would make the best fights. I think this is just a trope for the show to spin it on its head. But
yeah, I don't think he put any thought into like the quality of the fights, the humans involved. It's just formatting wise, this spices things, and to be fair, it does. Now, I will say, I don't think it's to the benefit of this particular episode, if we're getting ahead of ourselves, because like Kenny and Chris are so friendly with each other that they start going in circles, I think, like halfway through this episode, right? Of like, and they're talking about giving each other secrets. Really? I mean, this is really a little bit melodramatic, isn't it? This piece of business here we have in episode 10.
Oh, yeah. So we mentioned the semifinals are set. Lieben and Ken Flo, Koss and Diego. That's what we're moving forward with. We get some training of Kenny and Lieben together. They have like this cover on the octagon that they're training in. That's like basically like a wrestling mat.
Yep.
Steve, I don't know if you've ever jumped in these conversations with myself and Armadillo Dave on Twitter. Did you play with wrestling figures as a youngin?
Oh, yeah. I had the Hasbros and the official WWF ring and whatnot.
So the Hasbros and the Jakks Pacifics were pretty good about not doing this, but the WCW Galoobs and the San Francisco Toy Maker figures and those rings, they would scuff like a motherfucker. And this mat they have here in the octagon looks like someone just had the Vader and the fucking Nasty Boys, San Francisco Toy Makers, and were just scuffing them around the octagon the whole time.
Yeah, I think that particular mat is meant for takedown training and wrestling. So you probably have a lot of guys training in that mat in their shoes and just fucking the mat all up. Because it's almost like the old, like the 90s would see a lot of the Japanese mats would be shiny like that.
Mm.
It's that style. And it had a lot of give. Like you can see their feet plunging into the mat quite a bit when they were planning. So yeah, I'm thinking it's more of almost like the Performance Center supposedly has like a high flying soft mat they can crash onto. I think it's a similar concept for this.
The Performance Center allegedly has a lot of things, I've been told,
Yeah.
but
they call it the ACL destructor.
Joe, also this mat is for drilling someone into one of your teammates' backs and breaking their ankle.
Well, mistakes happen, Alex. You've been talking to me about that for a while now. I don't know if I appreciate it, but it's all the price of winning, brother. It's about competition.
So to Julio's point from the last episode that he was not thrilled about, this becomes like a love fest with Kenny Florian and Chris Lieben here. And just the visual of it made me laugh so hard. There's this part where Kenny Florian's basically confessing his love to Chris Lieben while there's this black and white picture of Pete Spratt over his right shoulder. And it's just kind of almost like the spirit of Pete Spratt is looking down on Kenny Florian doing this. And he's just, Chris, I'm going to be honest with you. When I first met you, I didn't think you were a good guy. But now I've gotten to know it's all this shit. And then they show Lieben has a to-go order of sushi. And I don't know why it bothered me so much, but Lieben pulls out the chopsticks. And that motherfucker thought he was so cultured for using chopsticks. That shit, it really annoyed me for some reason. I don't know why.
Is this relationship stronger than the Nate Lieben relationship from earlier in the...
Impossible.
There were no tears shed here.
Impossible, dude. That was a deeply moving situation we had with Nate and Chris. This is cool. I will say this is not really entertaining in the least. These two fellas just saying they like each other. The only positive is that Kenny, more than almost anyone else in the house, comes off like a real person.
Mm-hmm.
So you do at least buy that he's being honest, even if you don't really care to hear it. It doesn't come across phony, at least. That's the best thing I could say about it.
Yeah, I think once we lost Nate, Kenny becomes like the smart guy in the house. So it's almost like he's the stand-in for Nate for these scenes.
Yeah.
Like, we need a grounded person around Lieben. Get over here, son. You're in.
Well, and then do you buy Lieben's kind of adjusted personality? Because he really is almost like a different person now. And the second lease in life that he got, like, we haven't seen him. And of course, that could be just editing.
No booze.
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying. We haven't seen him drunk. We haven't seen him be particularly hateful. Right? Like, he's been on the level with like everybody else. Whenever he says something that's kind of mean-spirited, it's not worse than something that Koscheck would say. And so, do you buy it, or do you think that he's just on his best behavior because, well, they told him you can only come back if you don't fuck up again?
I mean, I think it is as simple as the booze, Alex. What do you think?
I was going to say also, I buy it in the sense of like he understands that he has a second chance here. And, because again, we joke about, we're all fortunate gentlemen in this way. We joke about like they're just getting paid $5,000, shit like that. But for these guys, it was clearly like life altering possibilities and opportunities that they had here. So, but yes, I think the no booze definitely helps out with that process because
he is in fear of jumping ahead, and looking at what happens after the show. Lieben did have. People are different in different contexts, right? Like, Lieben did have a very positive reputation as a training partner. Now, that doesn't mean the other stuff isn't real. He had a lot of major issues. But I think Florian was just surprised that he was a fun guy to, like, train with and spar with. And he actually knew a couple things incredibly, even behind all the bravado. So I think it's a little complicated, I think.
I guess my point is that this wouldn't have happened maybe in the first half of the season. Like, if you pair Kenny with Lieben before Lieben had gotten the boot, maybe they wouldn't have gotten along. I
think Chris is humbled somewhat by the Koscheck fight. It would be my guess.
I think we needed Corey in the first half because he saw Lieben in his drunken state and he said to himself, "I can fix him." So one thing that's not in doubt is that Chris Lieben got in his mind that throwing bolos was going to be his big catchphrase because he says it 3 or 4 times on this episode, like in every talking head. Steve, turning a phrase is very important for marketing yourself, but this ain't it, bro.
The first time he said it, I thought he misspoke. Like, I hear the phrase throwing bows, like elbows. No, he's going to throw bolos, brother. I'm going to sling those bolos. I'm going to throw the bolos. Bolorific. Bolo this. I'm like, man, come on. Like, I like this guy better when he was drunk.
Much like Lieben returned to the house, we have another return because we talked about Forrest Griffin's cut. So his future is in potential jeopardy. He's got these stitches. They're going to see how it heals. In the meantime, he needs to bring someone back in the event that he cannot participate. And so someone needs to get back in the house to kind of be on on deck. And it is none other than Bobby Southworth. Julio, you were very, very displeased when Chris Lieben returned to the fray. What are your sentiments about Bobby Southworth being back?
My note just says, LOL, Bobby Southworth is back. Because I didn't, like, Forrest leads with the talking head were saying, if you've been watching the show, you know who I'm bringing back. And I had to pause and be like, I don't.
I agree. Yes. I thought that was just me. Okay, good. All right, cool.
Yeah, I can see, retroactively, I can do the reasoning. I guess they're all part of that same group. They're on the same team. And more than any other episode before that, like the potential return of Bobby Southworth leads into people explaining what the house was missing when he was gone, which was somebody to clean up after them. So that kind of makes sense. But it just felt like it came out of nowhere. But honestly, I couldn't have thought of anybody else that they would have brought, unless I think it would have been a masterful move if he had brought Alex back, right?
Yes. Bobby, I'm sorry to say that he just blows it here. He's just not up to the task. This is just bad TV. Like, Lieben came in with this whole gimmick of being like revived, and he's like talking to all the guys. Bobby Southworth like checks in here like he's going to work an office job. Like he just walks in and like immediately resumes his role in the house without any pomp and circumstance. Like, come on, dude. This is very bad TV, I'm afraid.
He was leaving the wonderful world of television and DVDs to come back and live with these guys.
Do we get a shot of him taking the trash out? Or getting the trash ready?
Yes. We get like, I think Stephen Bonner's like, he's the only guy who gets stuff done, and you just get some like B-roll of Bobby just like putting stuff in the bin, just looking really bored. It's bizarre.
Yeah, Stefan has that voiceover. He's like, when Bobby was around, he just bitched and moaned, and it was really annoying. But then when he was gone, nothing got done around the house. So Bobby's back. It's conflicted emotions from the crew. I think more than like Lieben, this one makes sense at least because we talked about he should have at least gotten that third round. It was a pretty disputed decision that he lost.
That's true. That's true.
That and they didn't do a good job of explaining this, but after a knockout loss, there is a 30 or 60-day suspension period where you cannot come back and fight. Mm-hmm. So he would not have been able to revive Alex. A great bit would have been if he brought back Chris Sanford.
Yes.
Or no, Thacker was Strange Brew, I think was a middleweight, so that wouldn't have worked. But yeah, he brought back Chris Sanford, and Julio goes, "Who?" He's just
Sanford shows up 40 pounds overweight,
taking us back to the beginning of the season when Randy Couture had to get rid of. It was between Lieben and Sanford, and Randy Couture goes, "My two Chris's." Mixed emotions. We get a peace offering of sorts from Stephan Bonner. He offers they were really popular at that point in time. Steve, do you remember those bandanas that were like, they were like biker bandanas that came just already like a fucking do-rag cap, and it's red, white, and blue with the UFC logo on it, and I was like, God damn, I want that right now. I would wear that to every wrestling show I went to.
Between this and the last two Willa special attire she had, I am 100% convinced that it was a county fair or a rodeo or something had been in town, and they just somebody cleaned up at the ring toss, and this is what they did with it.
And then Sam Hoger stole it all from them.
Damn it, you stole my joke.
Lieben talks about his mixed feelings of Bobby's return in that he says Koscheck has been fine to be around, and now he's worried that Bobby's back. He's going to rile him up, which, you know, as dudes, I think we can all relate to that one friend that you're around and sometimes brings out your bad side, so to speak. And so I understand Lieben's concern here.
Isn't Sam also, doesn't he get a talking head when he's just bitching about it?
No.
Yeah, because he didn't like Bobby. Because Bobby had that incredible exit of just when he lost the fight, he decided to flip off Sam and go, traitor.
Now he would yell, thief.
I'm not a thief. Koscheck appears to be losing it because his talking head now is like close. His face is the frame, and he's got this hooded sweatshirt on that's pulled tight around his face. And I don't know if this was an artistic choice, but to me, it just comes across as a guy who's on the brink of losing it completely. He talks about he's glad that Bobby's back. And now we move on to building towards our fight here, our first middleweight semifinal. We've joked about this before, but you really have to put yourself in this moment in time. They're showing Lieben at the local YMCA cutting weight in that, like, to think about what the Ultimate Fighter became in the UFC is now, like, they had like saunas and all that shit on site for those guys in later seasons, and they were still telling Lieben, get down to the Y, you got to make weight.
Just out of frame, there's this old guy reading a paper with a fucking towel on his lap, balls hanging out.
He is notable. Like, so Lieben says his weight is 196 when he starts cutting. And it does stand out, this part, because obviously, as we've talked about, Kenny is his opponent, and Kenny ends up, as mentioned, at 145. Lieben was a career, this was just his weight, right? So, like, he must have been on top of his weight throughout this whole process. Of course, we have to now discuss that we get the reunion here, as Nate appears as like the angel on his shoulder, talking him through the fight.
Dude, my note here is that Corey has one moment in this episode, and it's a talking head of him explaining that Chris Lieben's dad abandoned him. That's what he does in this episode.
My notes in sequence. Lieben at 196. Let's go to the Y, and let's hear about poverty.
So it makes sense. I don't know why it surprised me, but because my note is Nate allowed to take sides? Because he's obviously training his boy. Like, he's rooting for Lieben, he's giving him pointers. And I thought that once he made it to the training level, right? Like he's part of the coaches now, he's an assistant or whatever. He's not allowed to like have favorites, but I guess he does, right? Because everybody seems to have a favorite. Obviously, Chuck and Couture, they're going for the people that are fighting for their teams, but especially at this point where it's like teammate against teammate, shouldn't they be impartial?
I think it's a case of just bad editing in the sense that they explain they're basically the conclusion is, oh, Kenny, for the sake of this, is just going to be Team Liddell again. But they do that after this, so it just makes Nate look an asshole. And especially after Randy's grand speech about no trading secrets, brother. So, because Nate at one point is like, when he clinches, the uppercut's there through the middle. And I'm like, good God, man. This is a cold game.
To be the yin to the yang here, we have Corey, expressing these heartfelt emotions and sentiments. From that, we go to Koscheck in the gym telling Kenny Florian, I'll be in your corner because, quote, I hate that freaking cocksucker. Nothing makes me laugh harder than a sentence where someone avoids swearing and then immediately swears afterwards. Nick Gage is a pro wrestler who's incredible at that. I was at a show one time and he said that was the biggest... What did he say? He said, that was the biggest piece of fucking crap I ever seen. And that shit makes me laugh so hard. So Koscheck here using freaking and then cocksucker. And then he also adds, I don't know if this was offensive to you, Joe, but he said, fuck that green. It looks ugly on you. Now he's disparaging the team. Yeah.
That was where I was going. I actually considered not showing up to this recording after hearing that part. Yeah, very insulting, but what do you expect? Classless as always from Team Liddell. We brought Kenny in as our own. He meshed. We told him we were happy to have him on board, and now look how things turn out. Just, it sums it up, really. We're used to it. It's fine.
So Koscheck is obviously Team Kenny, mainly because he wants Lieben out.
Yeah.
And Forrest becomes Team Lieben, which surprised me. Why is that? What's the rationale behind that?
Vibes. This thing is out of control at this point. I don't know. Bobby Southwell's walking around doing the rubbish for everyone, packing up bags. Sam's stealing stuff. I don't know, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, at this point, they probably have, a week and a half left. It's just fucking last week, senior year of high school vibes. You know what I mean? Just do whatever to... This is a run out the clock situation.
There's a television on a cart in front of the room at all times right now.
Well, which team are you guys, though? I have to ask.
Well,
going into this fight,
you know where I stand. Randy forever, brother. We're all in. Team Green.
Yeah, in real time, I would have been hoping Lieben pulled this off.
Oh yeah, I liked Kenny, but Kenny was like too nice of a guy. Whereas
totally.
Chris was just enough of a train wreck where he was easy to get behind.
There you go. That is true. Kenny is too nice of a guy. It comes across here. And even like the way he fights here coming up is still like of someone who is a bit too nice, which is kind of funny because not spoiling much, but Kenny Florian would go on to be a vicious finisher in the UFC. And so
really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I wouldn't have been able to tell just from his performance on this show.
Yeah, the weight is the big thing, right, Alex? Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. One of the things he would go on to be known for was his elbows. So, that kind of starts here.
Mm-hmm. That's the chainsaw.
That's the chainsaw. That's right. Before we can get there, though, it is explained from Dana White that Kenny Florian wasn't supposed to be on the show. Joe, I don't know if you remember this. It was pretty well known in the MMA world. It was Drew Fickett that Dana went to go scout in his fight against Kenny Florian. Drew Fickett was going to be on the show. He picked Kenny instead. Drew Fickett would go on to fight in the UFC several times, but a changing of fates for a young Kenny Florian here.
Because Drew Fickett almost had like a boxing record, didn't he? He had like was it 23? What was the record, Alex? 23-2 maybe? 23-1, something like that. And that's not common now. It was like just not a thing then at all. So Kenny has really very little resume, very inexperienced, and way undersized, as we've discussed. But Dana, in a rare Dana White triumph of this entire process, did obviously see the certain kind of guts and grit that would make Florian a real fighter for the years. So this was a rare... I'm sorry I credit Dana White, but I'll do it on this one occasion. Please erase the audio once we're done.
If Drew Fickett had got signed to this show after that fight, he would have come in at 23-2, and I think it would have been a safe bet to say, a la when Roy Nelson was announced for TUF 10, everyone was like, oh, well, there's the winner. I think they made the right choice here.
Would he have gone on to host BattleBots though?
No way.
Well,
no chance.
Mark Ratner is once again annoyed that he has to be here for this reality TV shit. When Kenny Florian steps on the scale, he just calls out 143. Kenny ends up coming in at 182, and they have the bit where I think it's Swick. Someone hands him a full bottle of Gatorade, and they ask him to reweigh him with the Gatorade. Lieben makes weight. We have a talking head of Chris Lieben. I don't mean to be juvenile, but you got to think about things you're saying. In this talking head, Chris Lieben says, I'm coming hard and I'm coming fast. And I was just like, brother, come on, man.
I think he says that twice. I think he's
along with Bolos,
which he doesn't know what that means. He does concede. Technically, he's a better fighter than me. Pump my fist for that. Respect. Yeah, we get a lot of the lads previewing their fight here. I thought this felt a little thin on content. I thought this, this spot we're building to the fight. The last episode, we discussed how it felt like the fight just emerged on us because we were worried about whether Sam was being a thief. Sorry, Sam, for using that word. But here, it's like, good God, can these fellas fight already? I mean, how many times can I explain this to me?
Yeah, that we've talked about throughout this, when the producers know they have gold and when they don't. It's like they were making the episodes in real time and didn't like sparse out content. So they finish up the Sam Hoger episode, they're popping bottles and lighting up cigars. And then they look at like the dailies for what the next episode's going to be and like, well, fuck. Call Lieben and Florian, get them back in the studio. We need to talk more about their fighting style.
This is, how do you fix it? That's the thing. Because the problem is that assuming that none of this is staged, you put yourself in a position where you have set this match. And actually it's Dana White's fault, right? Because he set it up.
Most things are.
What could they have done with whatever footage they had to make this a more interesting episode, right? I feel like they do everything they can. They try to sell you so hard on the friendship between these two guys and explain how they're different, and they have different people chiming in on who should win. Mm-hmm. And then they kind of throw the Bobby Southworth subplot in there to have something to cut to.
That's who's to blame. There you go. We found out. Bobby Southworth had an opportunity here and he blew it. He could have made himself quietly like the centerpiece of the episode, and he was too busy doing the garbage and cleaning up. He didn't seize the moment. This was an opportunity, but it is what you're right. I mean, Kenny's so nice. Chris is on his best behavior and actually likes Kenny, which kind of takes away most of the appeal of the Chris Lieben personality. Yeah. And but when they get in there, I mean, they certainly don't pull any punches once they get in there. So
they could have left a bottle of vodka under Lieben's pillow.
I'm sure they tried, yeah.
No, have Bobby Southworth doing it.
Yes.
That's the real through, like the subplot in the episode is Southworth trying to sabotage Lieben.
Yes.
It's that Parks and Rec where Jam is trying to get Leslie to drink that margarita. It's just Bobby Southworth with a big, like one of those fucking 25-ounce Busch Lights. He's like, oh, it's so cold, Chris. It's so delicious.
They equally could have played the Koscheck line about the green looking ugly to Randy and see what Randy produced in response. That could have gone to something.
He calls a team meeting.
Yeah.
They've defaced our crest. I think it's obvious here. The appeal of Lieben's first fight versus the second one is we had like the shit talk coming to a head with Koscheck. We want to see who's going to win. And here Joe, there's been plenty of fights that could have sold better if the guys hated each other more. The one that comes to mind, you remember the second Poirier Conor fight where he was trying to be like the nice guy, and people were like, what the fuck is he doing? Like, this isn't why we pay to see Conor McGregor. There's
a classic, this is boxing, but it's a great story. Over here, there was a big heavyweight fight. Dylan White and Derek Chisora, who are two of the more controversial characters in boxing, both have been suspended many times over, and they booked them to fight on the excitement that something's going to happen, right? And Derek Chisora went to the press conference and didn't say a single word because, quote, I'm not getting any of the pay-per-view buy. My purse is flat. I don't need to do anything. I'm going to just relax. And Eddie Hearn, the promoter, went and said, if it hits a certain number, I'll buy you a watch. And that night, they had a recording of a face-to-face, and Derek Chisora ended up having like a brawl with him at the studio to ensure that, that's the game, dude. Like, there's so much talk, especially as we're recording this, about this fight's rigged and that fight's rigged. The real rigging and the real performance is the pre-fight. That's the show, right? The fight is the fight. these two guys here, there's a general respect, but yeah, it's a real thing. Most of the biggest fights ever, there's some hatred there.
I remember I went to the second McGregor Diaz fight in Vegas, and that was the one where, for some reason, they thought it was a good idea to put unopened cans of Monster on the table, and so Conor was heaving those at Diaz and his team, and that immediately bumped up the hype. And like, you know, people, this fucking circus with Mike Tyson, they did that thing where, I'm not going to say it was planned ahead of time, but Mike Tyson slapped him at the weigh-in. You're exactly right. That's the way of putting it. In a lot of cases with fights, what happens in the ring, the cage, whatever, the octagon is not fixed, but the build to get there is definitely theatrics.
Tyson's a master of that, the Lennox Lewis fight, where they had the crazed brawl and all that. And as soon as the fight ended, it was like, it was all love, right? Because Mike knew what he was doing. He was there to get paid to get beat up by Lennox Lewis.
Is that the one where he's like, anything I would have said was in proposition for promoting a fight? I think that's where he dropped that line.
Yeah.
And then prior to, he was talking about eating Lennox Lewis's children.
Yes. Exactly.
But there has to be a way also of, like, the idea of two friends fighting is still appealing. So there has to be a better way of fixing it. Like if Nate Quarry hadn't gotten injured and somehow we got to a semifinal that was Nate Quarry versus Chris Lieben.
God forbid. Randy Couture just in tears at ringside.
He shows up like wearing like a neutral color. He's like, I just couldn't wear the green today. There's too much. This is too heavy. Steve, has there ever been a successful example in pro wrestling? And I mean successful like on a large scale of the idea of like the babyface, like, we're friends, I respect you, but we're going to solve it in the ring. Because I was just thinking like, I remember they built some Seth Rollins AJ Styles match around that one time, and I was like, this is fucking nerd shit, man.
It only works with it ends with one of the guys kicking the other in the dick.
There you go.
Like, you get there from a point of mutual respect, but then Larry Z has enough of Bruno's shit and crashes a chair over his head. That's where the money is.
Theatrically, that can work. I mean, fucking Warrior, the end of that is two brothers fighting each other.
Yes, but they hate, at least one of them hates the other one. So that's not the same. Because that was what I was thinking. But I was like, no, it's very, very different.
Yeah. And one of them was Tom Hardy too, which feels, with respect to Kenny Florian.
Very accurate. Very accurate portrayal of MMA in that fight. You've seen that movie, right, Joe?
Yeah.
It's a great movie, but like,
I really like it. Really like it.
Fucking Tom Hardy gets his shoulder separated with an omoplata, and there's no like commission or anything, so he's fighting the next round with just like his arm hanging at his side. And then he taps out and he realizes that like all the stress and the weight of the world is gone. It's quite good. Stress and the weight of the world is on Kenny Florian because he looks nervous as shit going into this fight. 28 years old, 3-1, 5'10". It's kind of the opposite of the Alex Schonauer. He comes out with this look and like body language of like, well, here I am. So let's see what happens. And Lieben, he's got like his game face on that I think is kind of played up for television. He's a guy, like we've said numerous times, when he settled into like what he was in the UFC, he became more believable in that way. But here I think he's doing like the making my face for the poster type thing.
A lot of bravado and kind of, we saw that before the Koscheck fight, right? Where he's trying to convince himself. A lot of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, but he actually, one of the things he says is that he learned from the Koscheck fight, right? So he's like, you have to go all in. Like he sold it as he was measured in the Koscheck fight.
Oh, that's what went wrong?
Strange. Yeah, well, that was an interesting point, actually. So this is something that's not discussed, but like there's a contradiction throughout the episodes because I'm almost certain that our fearless leader, Randy Couture, said that like the reason Chris lost was because he fought with emotion.
Yep.
But Chris's conclusion is he didn't fight with enough emotion.
Yep.
There is no conclusion on that, right? They just disagree and never explore it beyond that, I think.
Is he fighting with emotion? Is he fighting with emotion in this one?
I don't think so.
He's fighting way more measured in this.
Yeah,
like, there
that's
are parts
what I
of
thought.
that Koscheck fight where he was clearly like trying to take his head off.
That's not what Chris himself said. Bless these guys, man.
Well, just one thing to remember is these are not men of honor.
Great point. I hadn't considered that. That's a good call.
They're not men of honor, but they are the greatest athletes in the world, and that's a fact. Those are the things we've learned about the UFC fighters up until this point. Steve, I had to pause this because I was laughing so hard, and I think it's a entry into the discussion of why Dana White shouldn't wear suits. He comes into frame wearing this like kingpin tan beige number that looks like it was in that trash bag that Sam Hoger handed out. It is wrinkled to high hell. And he looks like a guy who he's wearing it and, his tie's tied, but he looks like a guy who doesn't understand how to wear a suit.
Well, I mean, his expertise is, do you want to be a fucking fighter or not? Do you want to be a fucking fashion icon? It's not his level of expertise, my friend, even though he's hanging out with millionaire casino owners. He's not quite Dana White, the guy. So he is getting the scraps, the second tier suits from the Fertittas, and not the real deal tailored outfits he would have later.
Just, I can't imagine what his go-to at this point in time, what his go-to ensemble for a wedding would have been. He might have just done the white guy thing where it's the white button-up tucked into slacks with the tie but no blazer.
Probably had like a Figaro bracelet and a very slightly opened top buttons of the shirt.
The silver framed glasses, that kind of like the Edge and Christian style ones.
Yes.
Fashion icon Dana White. Yeah, I like legitimately was just belly laughing out loud when he just like stumbles into frame with his wrinkled suit like he's a fucking third grader giving a book report. So the fight begins, and boys, it is very apparent that Chris Lieben thought he was just going to completely walk through Kenny Florian here. And he does for the most part. This is an interesting fight analytically. Joe, like, it seems that Kenny Florian is only like, he thinks he's in a Muay Thai fight because all he's doing, he's got that Muay Thai stance coming forward. He's going for his elbows, knees, and even his punches. He's throwing them at these weird angles. And like we said, Kenny Florian would go on to be a future title challenger and like a very, for his era, very elite fighter. But here, man, he's playing on like the easy difficulty against Lieben, who's in legendary mode for the purposes of what's going on here.
I think this is a case. I mean, obviously, yeah, Florian would develop a ton after this, but I also think this is just like a brutal style matchup in that Lieben is way bigger. So Florian's not got a wrestling match. He's not going to take Chris down, right? It's like they're going to stand up, and Lieben is famously durable on the feet, right? Like he's punch resistance, he's toughness. So it basically becomes, I like the fight, but it becomes quickly repetitive in the sense that Florian really struggles to find a way to stop Lieben from just walking forward. And, Lieben's, he's not exactly Sugar Ray Leonard with his offense, but he punches very, very hard and he's looping these shots in. The headline really quickly becomes just how tough Kenny is, because Kenny can't really get Chris's respect with strikes, right? Like Chris just kind of walks through everything, but he hangs in there, and that ultimately becomes enough, as we'll get to. So yeah, it's an interesting fight.
Lieben relying heavily, Steve. This was definitely a trend of the time. I don't think it happens as much anymore. The foot stomps, I always hated that shit, dude.
Later on, Kenny even said, "I didn't even feel it." It reminded me of the Joker in The Dark Knight after the head trauma. See, I didn't feel a thing.
Julio, this was a move at that point in time that is completely legal, but people kind of saw it as like a dirty tactic. Another one that wrestlers would use, Dan Henderson, I remember, did this because it wasn't illegal. If I have you down on the ground, I can pinch your nose and cover your mouth with my hand to like inhibit your breathing or disrupt your breathing. And so they were like, man, there was a fight last night. There's this dirty motherfucker named Michael Chandler. There's like obvious fouls, like grabbing the cage, hitting someone in the back of the head, fish hooking and shit like that. But here we see these things that were technically speaking legal, but frowned upon. Years later, the 8th season of The Ultimate Fighter was coached by two guys named Frank Mir and Antonio Nogueira. And the format had changed so radically at that point that you had to fight to get on the show. And the coaches would watch, and that's how they assessed who they wanted to like put on their team. And Frank Mir and Antonio Nogueira were going to fight for the heavyweight title at the end of the show. And they were watching the fights, and they're just sitting by each other, and someone starts doing those foot stomps. And Nogueira, in his Brazilian accent, goes, "Ah, man, I hate that." And Frank Mir goes, "I hate that too." And he like puts his hand out. And he's like, "We won't do that in our fight." And they like shook hands that they weren't going to do foot stomps in their fight.
They beat the shit out of each other when it came time to fight, but they didn't do any foot stomps.
Yes, to put it in perspective, there were no foot stomps, but he brutally knocked out Nogueira in their first fight and then broke his arm in their second fight.
Very violent.
Well, the other thing that Lieben does here that I hadn't seen, because I hadn't seen anybody foot stomping in all these fights we've seen so far, and also I hadn't heard anybody do sound effects when they punch. Which is that just a Lieben thing? Is that a more widespread thing that it just hadn't happened on the show yet?
Joe Stevenson, I remember, would key-eye every strike that he had. And it was like, the idea of a key-eye and the that shit is the idea of like exerting your energy into a strike and stuff like that. But yeah, it's way more apparent when it's in an empty warehouse and like there's no audio else, no crowd reaction. So Lieben, as Joe mentioned, is definitely playing from the Randy Couture playbook here with that dirty boxing on the inside repeatedly.
Yes.
Kenny gets just whomped in the first round, and the corners are Kenny's corners, one of kind of despair of like, well, just keep trying. We'll see what happens. And
he does.
He does land a great, like a lunging right hand that really catches Lieben off guard, but it doesn't affect him because here and as history would play out, Lieben's head was full of concrete and shit. So it's hard to wobble him. They clinch again, and someone yells out, "Elbows in the clinch." And boy, what a prescient remark that was, as Kenny just backs away and throws an elbow. Because of there's no crowd reaction or anything, you can hear it. The sound of it is disgusting. And as soon as they break, Lieben's a fucking mess. And up until this point, Julio, were you aware a fight could end due to a cut severity?
No, but it didn't necessarily surprise me based on what happened with Forrest, where everybody was very concerned about the cut after the fight. So it kind of tracks that if a fight was not over and somebody was bleeding profusely. I mean, even Lieben mentioned it earlier in this episode when talking about Forrest's cut, right? And so they definitely did a good job of driving home how much of a big deal it is to be injured in that specific area. So no, I did not catch what had happened. Like I just saw a lot of blood and I was like, where's it coming from? I couldn't tell because they'd been hugging basically. So I didn't know if it was Kenny's blood or Lieben's blood. And then I saw the replay and it all was clear.
Yeah, the elbows, I mean, famously, Joe, elbows were illegal in Pride Fighting Championship because the damage they do. And to this day, I mean, the most horrendous cuts are always elbows or knees, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure, yeah. And even Strikeforce didn't have elbows.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, this is an interesting one in that I wonder if this was still a 2-round fight. Because they're close to finishing 2 rounds, dude. Like, I wonder if they just... Because, look, with respect to Kenny Florian, I don't think he was going to be putting Chris's lights out anytime soon, So... it being a 3-round fight meant they would have to have let Chris fight for another 6 minutes with that cut, and I think that is a huge factor in the decision they reach. Lieben's reaction to the cut is like the most relatable is in the entire show because it's just like, fuck, that's literally the easiest way. Like, he isn't hurt, he's mad because he knows immediately this is a really bad cut. Even if he was to win the fight, it's like, it's a terrible cut, dude. It changes guys' careers, cuts like that, so that's that scar tissue we discussed at the start of the episode. So, I mean, Kenny just hangs in there and he has that one moment, and
it is a really bad cut too.
Really bad.
Dana explains, why it was stopped, and he touts that there's never been a serious injury or death in the UFC. And what's the standard bearer for MMA cuts? Is it Beastman Eastman with Vitor Belfort?
Probably because of how dare I say comedic that was, like the way he just emerges with this huge gash. Joe Stevenson, we were just discussing the BJ Penn fight where he poured blood. That was crazy, dude. Yeah. That's one that comes to mind.
There's another one that we'll circle back to because it involves one of our participants in the show that I don't want to spoil quite yet for Julio.
Yes. Yeah.
Julio, Lieben takes this loss a lot more gracefully and explains that, cut's a fair way to win it. He was definitely not this gracious of a loser with the Koscheck fight. So are you still anti-Lieben, or is he starting to endear himself a little bit more to you?
I was surprised that I actually felt a little bad for him. It's that moment that Joe called out. What his reaction to the cut was very, very relatable. You could just totally get that it wasn't him throwing a tantrum. It was him being actually hurt because that was it. He knew that it was over. And I felt bad for him. I was not rooting for him. I was rooting for Kenny Florian because of BattleBots mainly. And I just, I feel bad. I mean, it did make me wonder. Here's the final question about whether he came back a changed man or it was all just that, posturing. But would he have reacted this way if Koscheck had won by cut, right? If that fight had turned out where he got a gash on his forehead and he was bleeding, and then that was it. Do you think
he likes Kenny, obviously, but I also think because Kenny hung in there with him on the feet, he had no choice but to respect that Kenny lasted that long, right? Because he was hitting Kenny. I mean, he lands some huge left hands. And Julio, I have to stress to you, like, these are shots that we would later see him knock guys out cold with, like, regularly. He was a big puncher. He wasn't the most, versatile in terms of skill, but he was a huge puncher. So it's even more impressive through that lens. So I think he would know, like, this dude's tough. He hung in there long enough to land an elbow, man. God bless,
So is that luck or strategy that got Kenny to win?
Strategy is probably the wrong word, but it's a beautiful technique paying dividends at the end of the day. And especially back then, elbows, that was a very novel thing to land an elbow of that accuracy. I mean, it's a great, great strike. So, yeah.
And Steve, to close us out here, I think Dana White doesn't realize how prophetic the words he's saying is about his entire promotion. He says, Chris Lieben's a great kid, but he's clearly got some issues.
He's going to be a great fighter one day. With the idea that he stays under the watchful tutelage of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, he can become the man we all know he can be.
Well, boys, that wraps up the first middleweight semifinal. We're moving along to the second. And it's a big one. We're going to have Diego Sanchez versus Josh Koscheck without giving away too much, I think, probably in the fight of the season. So a lot to look forward to here. Thank you for listening to this episode of TUFtwenty. A reminder to subscribe to the podcast, visit wearethecontrarians.com, and follow the Contrarians across social media at Contrarian Prime.
You can also follow Alex individually at Contrarian Alex, and you can check out our other special projects on our Patreon channel at patreon.com/Contrarian Prime. If you want to listen to Alex teach me about The Rock and John Cena, that's where you need to go.
You can catch me weekly on the Late Night Grin, live and free on YouTube every Friday night. In addition, Alex and I collaborate monthly on Grin Grappler, discussing some of pro wrestling's biggest and baddest. If those grins are for you, check out LNG Gold, a YouTube membership plan that includes over 50 hours of exclusive content each month.
You can follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at NotDrDeath. That's NotDreath. Or you can block me now and save us both a lot of embarrassment.
Until next time, be sure to make your coaches proud and don't call anyone a fatherless bastard.